Milling Through History presents The Miraculous Evacuation. The events of Dunkirk is something that inspires many, and to even consider today is nothing short of a miracle. And yet, while this particular moment in time has been looked at repeatedly, it is necessary for younger generations to just understand exactly why this one particular moment in history shows the best of humanity at possibly one of its most darkest moments in time. And so, as we look at this, it's important that we begin to set the stage. On May the 10th, 1940, Winston Churchill would become the Prime Minister of Great Britain. When he arrived, though, he was entering into a very volatile situation, as Germany had already invaded France and was on the verge of cutting off the British Expeditionary Force from the main French army. On May the 24th, 1940, the German army would halt their advance to consider the best way to defeat the British and the French. And this halt has opened up a great deal of debate, as many people have been trying to understand why this occurred. Some have argued that the German Air Force had much closer ties to Hitler, and that they were the ones who had tried to convince him that it should be left to them to have the honor of defeating both the British and the French. Meanwhile, others have argued that Hitler had tried to create a negotiated peace with the British in order to keep them from interfering with Operation Barbarossa. The reason for this is that Hitler had hoped that a combined German-Anglo alliance would be better for the world, as many had pointed out that Hitler had a great admiration for the British and their abilities to rule as an empire. When the order to halt was lifted, though, on May 26, the 3 days that the Germans had given the British and French had allowed for the Royal Navy to come up with a plan for evacuation. As the German army prepared to advance forward, British and French forces had to contract their lines closer to Dunkirk in order to keep this one small lifeline to freedom open. German bombers would launch attacks to drop not only bombs but leaflets onto the defensive positions of the English and French, and in those leaflets they had gone ahead and said their situation was hopeless. For the Germans, they considered the English Channel to be a barrier, but the English saw it rather as an escape route. From May the 26th to May the 28th, British forces continuously retreated towards Dunkirk, fighting the entire way, and in many cases risked the possibility of getting wiped out. To make matters worse, though, on May the 28th, the Belgian army, being commanded by King Leopold III, surrendered and left a 20-mile gap in the defense perimeter surrounding Dunkirk. The British would have to send exhausted men back to the front and, just in the nick of time, prevented any possibilities of the Germans breaking through the defensive perimeter and effectively swallowing up the British Expeditionary Force. From May the 29th to May the 31st, the Germans continued their attack on the defensive perimeter and almost found themselves having opportunity after opportunity for a breakthrough, but were stopped due to numerous events, such as geographic hardships, the sheer luck through the efforts of British soldiers and officers, and hardy defenses from French forces, which go ahead and allow for otherwise dominant German forces to overwhelm other defensive positions. By June the 1st, however, the Germans would change their tactic as they would make an all-out attack on the defensive perimeter. Slowly, the British forces would be forced to retreat, and as they did a fighting retreat, were able to be completely pulled out of the battle by June the 2nd. French forces, however, remained and would slowly get pulled out until June the 4th, when the Germans were finally reaching the shores of Dunkirk and there was no more opportunity left to pull men out. As a result, 35,000 Frenchmen were forced to surrender, but their efforts were certainly able to prevent more men from being captured. But while the fight was raging on, the decision to evacuate by the sea was made by the Royal Navy during the 3-day halt on May the 25th, 1940. With all the docks badly damaged, the British would use the moles, or seawall, to evacuate men. The decision to do this would help speed things along, as British warships would get as close as possible, and then the men would go ahead and run across the walls. The British Navy, however, was not alone in the rescue of these soldiers, as they were aided by sailing craft which came from England across the Channel to the shores of France. These craft, which were much smaller and able to get closer to the beach, would aid in the evacuation of soldiers as they would ferry men from the shore back to warships and also back to England. In total, 338,226 men were able to escape. These men were made up of soldiers from England, France, Poland, and Belgium. Following the evacuation of Allied forces, the French continued to fight on, and the British did send a second expeditionary force back into Europe to try to help. However, the situation became too daunting as the resources the British had were rather limited. When the expeditionary force had evacuated from Dunkirk, there was enough supplies left behind on the beaches to outfit up to 10 divisions worth of men. As such, the British only had enough supplies to have 2 divisions worth of men who could be fully occupied to fight in a war. As such, the British need to quickly find a way to produce material to fight a war. By the 14th of June, the Germans had taken Paris, and the British would evacuate their personnel once again. 8 days later, on June 22nd, the French were forced to surrender, and as such, the Germans would go ahead and occupy mainland Europe for a steadfast 4 years, until, in 1944, the D-Day invasion would occur, almost a full 4 years to the day that the British were forced to evacuate. Now be sure to click like, share, and subscribe for future episodes of Milling Through History. And be sure to leave comments below for future episode ideas. And be sure to take a look at our suggested reading page.